This is an online article from Bloomberg about how Singapore mitigates climate change. It was published in August 2024, just in time for National Day. So it's a special newsletter dedicated to matters about Singapore. Let's go to the first paragraph, starting from the subtitle, A Very Expensive Problem. We all know climate change is coming, but how is it coming? Will there be more frequent floods, more frequent droughts? As sea levels rise, walls may keep the waves out. But what about seawater seeping in from below and contaminating the water supply? What about storm surges? So you can see in this first opening paragraph, it is full of questions. We call these rhetorical questions. Rhetorical questions do not require you to answer directly to the writer, but it is there for a reason. This is a very common authorial technique, and the author asks questions in the first paragraph to engage the reader, to get them to think. Another technique used here is to make the problem relatable to the reader by saying, we all know climate change is coming. The reader is saying, this is something that we all know and that we should all be interested in. So, this is something that you can use for your own essay writing when you want to write an introduction that hooks in the reader. And when you are asked in comprehension why the author asks a question in the first paragraph, you know that it is to engage the reader, to get them to think about the topic specifically. Alright, let's move on. As Singapore prepares to mark 59 years since independence, the battle to counter climate change has become, as Senior Minister Lee Hsien Loong once put it, a life and death matter. The small, mostly low-lying island is on the front line in the race to adapt to a warming world. But it has one big advantage over many nations facing a similar threat: money. The scale of the task was brought home to me while researching a story about the Stamford detention tank, part of a 170 million structure built to protect the prime shopping area of Orchard Road from floods that in the past caused tens of millions of dollars in damage. So this portion, it is to link the problem of climate change to the issue of money. And why is money important? Because this article is talking specifically about the Stamford detention tank, which is an underground structure below the Orchard Road that allows water from heavy rains to drain into so that it will not flood Orchard Road. Because in the past flash floods have happened and caused tens of millions of dollars of damage to Orchard Road. But it is expensive. It costs $170 million to build. So this is talking about the Stamford detention tank, which is shown here. It's just an underground structure, a very big space for the sole purpose of storing rainwater, excess rainwater. Okay, the cavernous means very big and spacious, like an underground large cave, hence cavernous. The cavernous underground vault, unveiled 6 years ago, has never been fully utilized. So it has not been fully used yet. But why? Okay, let's read on. Part of preparing for extreme weather is investing in infrastructure that isn't used often. The PUB, Singapore's National Water Agency, has also developed more than 8,000 kilometers of drains, canals, and rivers that channel storm water into reservoirs. It has spent $2 billion on drainage infrastructure just in the last decade. So let's take a look at this more closely. The Stamford detention tank has never been fully utilized, but this is the point when preparing for extreme weather. So the thing about extreme weather is that it does not occur often, but when it does happen, it causes a lot of damage. So Singapore, it will be too late if Singapore only reacts when the extreme weather happens. When the flash flood happens, there is no time to build an underground vault. So you have to build it in advance. And the extreme flood may not come tomorrow, it may not come next month, it may not come in the next 10 years, but it will come eventually. And when it comes, Singapore will be prepared. Okay, so let's move on. The government has estimated that the total bill to combat rising sea levels could reach $100 billion over a century. The nation must construct a continuous line of defense along our entire coast, PUB Deputy Director told me. Okay, so in Singapore, to combat climate change, it's not just about having good drainage for heavy rains, it is also to combat rising sea levels, because we are a small country surrounded by the sea. So there has to be a continuous line of defense along our entire coast. Any breach in this line of defense, the seawater will get in. So it has to be a continuous line. Again, this is not cheap. $100 billion. That is 9 zeros in a billion. Add 2 more zeros in the 100 here, that makes it 11 zeros. But this will be spent over a century. Deciding what to build won't be easy. The variation in how high the sea might rise is huge, depending on the decisions we make on emissions, said the director of Earth Observatory of Singapore. So this is a research institute in Singapore studying geology, geography, the impacts of climate change. All right, so there is no one number the engineers can easily plan for. So what does this mean? It means that predicting climate change is also not easy, because scientists may predict that sea levels may rise 5 meters, it may rise 10 meters, it may rise 100 meters. It can change depending on how much emissions our global population generates, and a multitude of other factors. Nobody can predict the future. And because of that, deciding what to build also will not be easy. Do you protect yourself against just a 5-meter increase in sea level change? That may be cheaper, that may be easier, but it wouldn't be enough if the sea levels rise just 5.1 meters, right? If we prepare for an increase in 10 meters sea level change, that may be pretty safe, but it's really expensive, and the money could have been better used for other things like education, healthcare, creating jobs for Singaporeans. So there's a lot of things to think about. So you see, the lesson that we learn from this article is that combating climate change is tricky. It requires science and engineering. Science in terms of understanding climate science, the factors to predict the levels of sea level rise and the volume of rainfall that we will get. That requires understanding of climate science and also understanding of engineering to be able to create such structures. An underground storage of water will not be easy, given that it is underneath a busy street that has to accommodate so many buildings. Electricity, utility fittings has to be sturdy enough so that pedestrians and traffic can continue above for the safety of everyone, right? The engineering of having to build seawalls, a continuous line of defense. There is no room for mistake. All of this requires engineering expertise and, of course, a lot of money. This is not resources that every country has. So Singapore is lucky and fortunate, but it's not something that we can take for granted as well. Okay, so what are the themes that we can learn? One is that tackling climate change requires financial resources. It requires scientific expertise, engineering expertise, and the effects of climate change will not be equal for different countries, precisely because of all these resources that is needed to combat climate change adequately.
Goodbye.